the holiday? As you can see on the screen, I put up the Mayflower. What? The boat, the Mayflower. What does that got to do with the 18th of Elul? Well, if you know, historically, the Mayflower actually set sail on the 18th of Elul in what year? 1620. But I don't know, even though the Mayflower is the beginning of the pilgrims going to America and finding a new country, and what year was Van Riebeeck coming here? 1640, 1652, you know your history. 1620, the Mayflower came to America. 1652, Van Riebeeck comes to South Africa, and new times are about to happen. But is that what makes today significant? No. Today, the 18th of Elul, is a special day. In fact, it's the Miracle Drive dinner today. Is that what makes it special? We chose to do the Miracle Drive dinner on this day because today is a special day in the Hasidic calendar. What makes today so special in the Hasidic calendar? Well, this is a day that not only did we experience the events that heralded the democracy and new era for many people, but this is also a day that in the year Nachas, what's Nachas? Taf Nun Ches, 1698, was the birth of Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. Not only that, what did he do? What did the Baal Shem Tov do? What was so special? Why are we celebrating his birth on this day? Well, not only his birth, we'll get in a moment to the birth of the Alter Rebbe too. He started the Hasidic movement. So the question, of course, is what defines a Chassid? What is a Chassid? We're all familiar with the Hasidic movement. And is it the black hat that one wears? Is it that they follow a Rebbe? I remember when my mother was unwell and she was in hospital, and the doctor asked her if she's Hasidic. She said, yes, I'm Hasidic. So while we might be, and you are in Chabad, and Chabad, after all, is part of the Hasidic movement. And what is it? What is the definition of a Chassid? Now, like I said previously, we talked about this. I don't want to spend too much time on this angle. I'm going to get more into the Hasidic movement. I don't want to spend too much time on the preamble, the history. But what can we learn from Hasidism? And no, I want to give you a little secret. For all of you who attend our Shiurim here every day, very likely you are tremendously influenced by Hasidism, because almost everything I teach has to do with the Hasidic teachings. It was based on, or is through the lens, through the paradigm of Hasidus. So that's why it is an important day to celebrate. You can all see the screen. Good. So with that in mind, we're going to answer this question, not by me telling you the answer. I'm going to share with you an answer just now that was shared by the Russian Minister of Education. His name was Sergei Uvarov. Anyone heard of him? Well, now you can see what he looked like. He was a 19th century Minister of Education in Russia. And the thing was, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe at the time, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, known as the Tzemach Tzedek, the great-grandfather of the Rebbe, he was the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, a lot in common between him and the Rebbe, who was his successor about 90, how many years later? Well, if he passed away in 1866, then the Rebbe succeeded him in 1951. So what is that, 85 years later? Help me out with my maths here. Yeah, 85 years later. 1866, he passed away. And the Rebbe took the reins of leadership of Chabad in 1951. So if my math serves me correct, that's 85 years later, right? They both shared the same first name. They both shared the same last name. And their wives were also both Chaya Mishka. Also amongst the Chabad Rebbes, they both lived the longest. They both lived the longest period, and probably had, are you okay? Okay. And they both had the largest amount of Hasidim, of followers. So there's a lot in common between the Rebbe and his predecessor, his great-grandfather, the Tzemach Tzedek. Well, the Tzemach Tzedek was invited to a particular conference. This was a conference on matters of Jewish education. I think they called it the Rabbinic Conference on Education, but this was the Russian government who were trying to interfere with educational matters. They wanted Jewish children to be more Russian, less Jewish, and they wanted to change their curriculum in the Jewish schools. It was a long meeting. The Tzemach Tzedek was put on house arrest 22 times. The meeting lasted almost 4 months, from the beginning of May to the end of August of 1843. And at this meeting, it was this Minister of Education who asked the Tzemach Tzedek this question. Judaism has been around for so many years. So what did Hasidism contribute? What difference did it make? Did you ever give it thought? No? Okay, well, that's what we're going to talk about today. And maybe, hopefully, we'll get a chance to get into meditation as well. But knowing me, we won't get there. Well, which part? No, it's not a rhetorical question. I'm asking seriously, if anybody wants to, in a nutshell, because I'm gonna elaborate. But if anybody wants to share, it's open. It's not a rhetorical question. It's a real question. What did Hasidism contribute? What do you know? What do you feel? And I think you're certainly qualified to answer that, Miriam. Please. No, it's not stealing the thunder. I want participation. I'd love to hear if anyone has a particular answer they want to share. Anybody? Okay, let's continue. We'll see what happens. So here's a video that I showed in a course we did a couple of years back, Great Debates in Jewish History. And this video, let's just see if it plays nicely. If not, we'll just move forward.
One of the greatest catastrophes of Jewish history was the destruction of Spanish and Portuguese Jewry in the 14th and 15th centuries. By the 14th century, the Jewish population of Spain and Portugal numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and Jews were integrated into all areas of society. The major turning point came in 1391, when murderous anti-Jewish rioting erupted in many Spanish cities. Frenzied mobs presented their Jewish neighbors with a choice: convert or die. Thousands of Jews were brutally murdered for refusing to convert to Christianity. Countless others converted in order to save their lives and were referred to thereafter as the conversos. Then, in 1478, the notorious Spanish Inquisition began persecuting the conversos, punishing those they suspected of practicing Judaism in secret. An untold number of conversos were arrested and tortured, and many were publicly burned at the stake. In the spring of 1492, the Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, expelled the Jews from Spain.
When the Jews were expelled from Spain, they either stayed and converted to Christianity, or they left Spain proper and traveled to North Africa and elsewhere. Many moved to Portugal. Portugal was close, and they settled there very nicely. Unfortunately, the King of Portugal, Manuel I, was put constantly under severe pressure by Ferdinand and Isabella to do to his Jews precisely what they had done to theirs. Manuel did not want to do that. They were far too important to his economy, to the administration of his kingdom, and to all other kinds of other things.
But King Manuel was not able to resist the diplomatic and political pressures indefinitely. In 1497, he hit upon a solution.
He closed the ports, and he declared that all Jews have to leave or they have to convert to Christianity. Now, since the ports were closed and the borders to Spain were closed, there was nowhere for the Jews to go. And there are records of priests going through the Jewish areas of Lisbon and elsewhere with huge barrels of holy water and wholesale sprinkling them with holy water and saying, "You're all Christians." In other words, he effectively converted the entire Jewish community at one blow and declared that they're all Christians.
The majority of the Jews in Portugal lived outwardly as Christians, but kept Judaism in secret. Unfortunately, however, the tentacles of the Inquisition were soon unleashed, and this brought about terrible persecution. In the ensuing years, thousands of families succeeded in escaping Portugal to begin life anew elsewhere. Few 15th century Jews could consider themselves unscarred by the horrors. Many Jews were first-hand victims, having run through the flames on their way out of Spain and Portugal. Others, including Rabbi Eliyahu Kapsali, experienced the horror secondhand. Rabbi Kapsali was born on the Mediterranean island of Crete, then known as the Kingdom of Candia, in 1483. His father, the chief rabbi of Candia, mobilized a relief network for the waves of Jewish refugees fleeing the Iberian Peninsula. The young Eliyahu was deeply affected by their tales of unspeakable horror. Rabbi Kapsali set his hand to the quill. He viewed the unexplainable evils as a backdrop to the greatest and most enduring salvation, that of the Messianic era.
So you find among Spanish and Portuguese Jews in Spain and Portugal, and certainly among those who were exiled, an intensification of a sense of the coming of the Messiah and a yearning for the coming of the Messiah because of the travails that they had undergone under the Inquisition, in the expulsion, and this whole sense that the world had turned upside down.
Rabbi Kapsali noted that Jews were now more concentrated and less spread out, and he viewed this as a preparatory phase for the ingathering of exiles. In fact, the majority of Spanish and Portuguese refugees had resettled in the Ottoman Empire, which governed the land of Israel, sparking an unprecedented wave of return to the Jewish homeland. For these reasons, many Jews believed that all the arrows were pointing to the imminent redemption of the Jewish people. Perhaps the catastrophes of Spain and Portugal were the prophetic sufferings that were said to precede the Messianic age. But is the Messianic redemption a fate to wait for with folded arms? Or does it require determined action at an opportune time? The Jews of the 16th century were divided over this dilemma. One rabbi was particularly convinced that Jews had to seize the opportunity. Rabbi Shlomo Mocho was born in Portugal in the year 1500. His family was forcibly converted to Christianity, and as a child, he was neither circumcised nor educated in Judaism.
And he was a very talented individual who ended up serving in a very senior capacity in the service of Manuel I, the King of Portugal, who actually brought about the forced conversion of the Jews of Portugal.
Despite having a highly accomplished position at the royal court, Shlomo Mocho was eventually inspired to discover Judaism. He fled to Italy, where he fully re-embraced the religion of his ancestors, a capital offense in Christian lands in those days. He became a prominent rabbi and teacher of Kabbalah, but his brilliance and charisma also curried favor with Italy's aristocrats and rulers. In 1532, Rabbi Shlomo traveled to Germany to meet the Emperor, Charles V, on a most ambitious mission. He hoped to convince Charles to supply military arms to the Jews of his empire and enable them to wage war against the Ottoman Turks, who then ruled the Holy Land. Charles stood to gain from such an endeavor, since this would greatly weaken his most worrisome foe.
This is the era in which the Ottoman Turks are developing their empire. The Ottoman Turks ultimately will almost conquer Europe. So the Ottomans were a very serious threat, and Christendom was very concerned about them.
In fact, Charles had only recently received information that the Ottoman army was readying for war against him. Shlomo Mocho thought that Charles would welcome a Jewish alliance against the Turks. News of Mocho's intentions reached the ears of the German Jewish community before Mocho's arrival. One famous rabbi, the legendary Yosul Rosheim, paid close attention.
He was best known for intervening on behalf of Jews throughout Christian Europe, especially in the areas of the empire. So whenever there was a blood libel or whenever there were agitations against Jews, whenever Jews were in danger, he would swoop in and he would try to help them.
Yosul of Rosheim saw danger in Shlomo Mocho's plan to ask Charles V to arm the Jews of his empire.
Charles V, in a sense, was even more religious and more fanatic than the Pope. That's not a big surprise. His mother was a woman named Juana la Loca, Joanne the Mad, who was the daughter of none other than our friends Ferdinand and Isabella. He was like his grandparents on steroids. So all he could see when he met Shlomo Mocho was a renegade Jew.
Rabbi Yosul tried to dissuade Mocho, but the latter was determined to press forward nonetheless. When he came before the emperor, Rabbi Shlomo was given the same choice his family had faced before he was born. And now, in the moment of truth, he chose the Jewish faith once again. Although his bold plan died with him, its underlying messianic motivation did not. The disagreement between Rabbi Moho and Rabbi Yosul of Rosheim highlighted the great debate of that era. Many Jews viewed the catastrophes of Spain and Portugal as the prophetic sufferings that were thought to precede the Messianic age. The question was, how active a messianic role must the Jewish people take when they sense that the time is ripe for redemption? For the likes of Rabbi Yosul of Rosheim, bettering one's personal service of God through study, prayer, and good deeds was all that was required. But for the likes of Rabbi Moho, this was allowing the opportunity for the Jewish redemption to slip away. God had signaled to the Jews through world events that if they were to rise up and make their way home, He would crown their efforts with messianic success. This debate continued to ferment in rabbinic circles. Then, in 1538, just 5 years after Rabbi Mocho's martyrdom, the contention erupted furiously in the controversy over rabbinic ordination.
The rabbinic ordination part, the reason I posted this video is so you can get a little bit about the history of the Hasidic movement. Now, you saw nothing about the history of the Hasidic movement there yet, but we'll get you another video onto that in a few minutes. That was to tell you what was happening in Jewish history at the time. So Jews were living in Spain and Portugal, and already from 1391, 1391 did it say? That Jews were being already persecuted and told to leave Spain. Now, why is this relevant? Well, let's talk a little bit about the Jewish studies that we all like to engage in. We have the Torah, right? The 5 books of Moses, and the Tanakh, which the Ta is Torah, the Na is Nevi'im, the prophets, and Ch is reference to Kesuvim, the scriptures, and those together are known as Tanakh. That is the Bible, 24 books that we did a whole course on. You guys remember back in February? All right. So then comes the oral Torah. If you remember from that course, we looked at the Mishnah, the Gemara, which together forms the Talmud, and Halacha, and many other works. Okay? If I were to tell you the composition, the makeup of Jewish literature and the basis, the way it's understood is something called Pardes, which literally means an orchard. But the word Pardes can also be dissected as an acronym. The Pei of Pardes is Pshat, the literal understanding of Torah. The Reish is Remez, the various allusions of what it refers to. The Dalet is Drush, the expounding upon it as the sages do. And the Samach is Sod, the mystical element. So this can be considered the outside, the body of Torah, but there's also a soul to Jewish teachings as well. And what is the soul? That's the mystical side. Now, what do we know about mysticism? As you saw in the previous video, while the Spanish expulsion was happening from 1391, culminating in 1492 with the Spanish Inquisition, during that period, many Jews had to leave, were forcibly expelled from the Iberian Peninsula. In fact, I think it was 5 years after the Spanish Inquisition was the Portuguese, Inquisition, when Portuguese Jews were then coerced, and they weren't even given the choice of, I don't remember what the story was, but it was a little different. I think it was much harsher than this. Well, in Spain, they said either join Catholicism or leave the country. I think in Portugal, they didn't even give them the option to leave the country. They said to them, either you convert or we execute you. Yeah. Right. Was that Ferdinand's daughter and Isabella? Why was there such a hatred? And it came more from her, from Isabella, than Ferdinand. She was more passionately anti-Jewish than he was. But Rome, Italy had a Jewish community that never expelled them. Why was Spain that much more cruel? And Italy didn't expel the Jewish community. They put them into ghettos. The first ghetto, I think, was in Italy, if I recall correctly, from what I had learned. I believe the first ghetto was in Italy. I might be mistaken. That's where I think the first, pardon? Yeah. It's just interesting how they hated us that badly. This is Sfard literally means Spain. So a Jew is a Sephardic Jew, is generally from that area of Europe, Spain and Portugal. And you'll notice that in many countries, in New York, as an example, there's a major shul. If any of you have been to Amsterdam, because most of the Spanish Jews and Portuguese Jews wound up going to Holland. And a lot of them settled in Holland. And until the Holocaust, Holland had a very sizable Jewish community. And I've had some experience going. I spent the summer in Belgium. So I've been to Holland a couple of times that summer. And we went and I davened there one Shabbos at the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue. It was quite an interesting experience davening there. You know, you're looking at a shul, I think it's a couple of hundred years old. And that's where the Jews from Spain and Portugal who were expelled settled. I mean, that's not the only place. We're going to talk about the other places in a moment. Yeah. Serious. Well, they called them Marranos. They called them Marranos, which means pigs. That was the name they gave Jews who disguised themselves as not Jewish. The Spanish called them that. Very interesting. With Van Ribbeck, how many Jews came here then? But the first formal Jewish community here is only about 180 years old. That's the Gardens Shul. I'm sure there were some before, but that's the oldest known. Right. Well, according to many, we don't know about Christopher Columbus himself, but there were certainly Jews on the boat with him. Right. Either way, why are we getting into all this? Because the relevance of it is that amongst the Jews, the Spanish Jews, just by the way, a lot of people call Mizrahi Jews Sephardim, but they're not. That's Eastern Jews. Mizrahi, that's referring to Jews who are in many of the Mediterranean countries. Right? That's not Sephardic. We oftentimes confuse Moroccan and Jews from Iraq and Iran. They're not Sephardim. They are Mizrahi. Now, of course, we're all Jews at the end of the day, but just to know and understand the different structures and communities and customs, because Jews in those days, you couldn't just send a WhatsApp message around and know, and the customs and traditions were different. For those who've been watching that series on Netflix called The Beauty Queen of Jerusalem, yeah, there you could see there's a little bit of rivalry between different Jewish groups. And oy vey, he's seeing the Zerachela, she's Ashkenazi. Oy, 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 oy. I found it very interesting looking at that series a little bit. My wife hated it, so we never watched the rest of it, but we started it when we had a little bit of time. When a couple of weeks back, we took a little break. We thought, okay, let's watch something, but that wasn't going to be the thing we were going to watch at the end, so we didn't. I didn't get to see the rest of it. But in that one little episode that we watched, until we made that determination that we're not going to watch it further, we saw quite a few interesting observations. So very interesting. Didn't end well. Did it? I thought they killed the guy. I thought her brother gets killed. That's not so well. He was a dissonant. Yeah. All right. So the reason I mention all this is because we get to the mystical element of Judaism. Jewish mysticism was somewhat obscure, was somewhat unknown, was somewhat not really studied. The teachings of Kabbalah are very mystical, very esoteric, and it's also called Nister. It's called the concealed component of the Torah. And whereas various components of the Torah are revealed, like I said before, we have the halacha. This is the way we do it. That's the revealed aspect of the Torah. That's what we believe. That's what we practice. That's what we, all those aspects. But then the deeper aspects, the abstract ideas, the process of divine creation, the spiritual DNA that lies behind all the physical matter, that is more the Kabbalistic side. And that was less known because, in fact, that they say, how old must one be to study Kabbalah? 40. Okay, everyone here surpasses 40? Not me. I'm still 18. What's the number 40? What's the magic number? Okay, the truth is there's a lot to it. I'm not going to go into all the significance of the number 40 right now. But the idea is that hopefully at the age of 40, you've attained some wisdom and understood the more basic external aspects of Torah. And now you can get into the deeper elements as well. But because these teachings are so deep, sublime, and abstract, Kabbalah, for the most part, remained out of the public sight for most of Jewish history. It was never published in writing. It was never taught to the masses. These sublime teachings require the utmost attention and guidance of a mentor, of a teacher, in order for them to be properly understood, so one doesn't go meshugah. If you read, there's some stories in the Gemara about some of the great sages who just, these deep teachings threw them off the deep end. So why? They just couldn't handle it. If it's misunderstood, if it's misconstrued, it can cause more harm than good. And so from the times of Moshe, these secrets of the Torah were not publicly published, and they were more of a esoteric matter. So here Maimonides tells us why that is. He says the secrets of the Torah were transmitted by small groups of elite scholars, As the sages have said, the secrets of the Torah may only be transmitted to a person of counsel, a skillful craftsman, one who understands the secrets. Only small snippets and allusions to them appear in the Talmud and Medrash, like a few kernels contained in a great many shells. When occupied with the shells, people don't even know that kernels lie beneath them. So at the end of the day, you can learn how to live a good, robust Jewish life without ever studying Kabbalah. And if you study Tanakh, if you study the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Medrash and Halacha and all the other works, you will certainly know exactly how to live a proper, fully observant Jewish life, right? So if that's the case, no need to study Kabbalah. But in the 13th century, after we're talking about, we said 1390, what year is it? 1391 was when the Spanish Inquisition was beginning. And during that period is when these teachings started to become more prolifically renowned and published. And that's when the Zohar, which is based on the teachings, the mystical teachings that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai expounded upon, that's when these teachings started to become more published. What happened, though, we're going to fast forward now to the time of the Arizal. Okay. What happened? The Arizal, here you get the summary of that era. We're just going to fast forward from here. Here we go. Let's go to the Arizal. The Arizal was born in 1534, passed away in 1572, lived a very relatively short life. But, and by the way, I don't think he wrote any books himself. Most of his teachings were proliferated by his students, most notably Rabbi Chaim Vital. Okay, he started to publish a lot of the deep esoteric teachings of Torah. So here you get a little bit about his history. When he came, he was from the Spanish expulsion, but not himself, because if you look here, he was born in 1534, right? 1534, Jews were expelled from Spain unless they were living as Marranos. So his parents were from the exiliarchs of Spain. They settled in Israel. A lot of Jews went to the Ottoman Empire. The Turks saw this as a wonderful opportunity, and they welcomed the Jews into their countries. After all, Jews were renowned for the success, and the Turks themselves didn't exactly like the Christians, so they were happy to welcome Jews into their countries. And that's when a lot of Jews started to return to Israel. After his passing, his student Rabbi Chaim Vital began to proliferate his teachings a lot more, and that's where we have the teachings of Kabbalah becoming a lot more renowned. Do you prefer this in a video, or do you prefer if I continue? Yeah, I think we're gonna, I don't know, you wanna watch a video about the history of the Arizal?
In the 14th century, Jews migrated en masse to Poland, which then controlled parts of the Ukraine and Lithuania.
First major Polish king, Kazimir the Great, invites Jews to come to live in Poland to help to develop the country economically. He gives them very, very good conditions of life. He gives them tax breaks. He gives them all kinds of rights, which perhaps normally the Catholic Church would not want them to have. And that attracts a lot of Jews eastward. What also attracts the Jews eastward is the fact that Jews are thrown out of England in 1290, they're thrown out of France in 1306 for the first time, and out of France for the last time in 1394. There are all kinds of anti-Jewish attacks and blood libels and all kinds of other libels and massacres throughout Germany in the 14th century, so that the survivors run eastward, where anti-Semitism perhaps is not as deeply embedded yet in the population.
For 3 centuries, Poland's Jews enjoyed a respite from the relentless persecution that racked neighboring lands. They referred optimistically to their host country by the Hebrew po-lin, meaning "we shall rest here," hoping that the tranquility would continue until the Messiah would arrive to lead them back to their homeland. Safety and financial stability translated into a spiritual blossoming. Poland became the epicenter of Ashkenazic Jewry, with an exceptional pious norm. In one of his works, 17th century mystic Rabbi Nosson Hanover describes the climax of their spiritual climb.
Every Jewish community maintained a yeshiva. Every community had young students whom they supported with a weekly stipend so they could study. There was scarcely a house in all of Poland where the Torah was not studied.
In the 16th century, the Szlachta, the Polish nobility, puts the Jews to work many Jews to work in a very special enterprise. They conquer the Ukraine and take over all kinds of very large estates, and Jews are appointed to run the estates for the Szlachta. Now, the Ukraine, as opposed to the rest of Poland, is not Catholic. The Ukraine is Greek Orthodox. The Ukrainians see the Poles as not only as overlords and as oppressors who squeeze them for money, they also see them as heretics.
In 1648, a savage man by the name of Bogdan Chmelnytsky led the Ukrainian Cossacks in an uprising against the ruling Polish nobility in a bid for independence. Chmelnytsky diverted much of his war effort to a genocidal purge of the region's Jews. As agents of the Polish nobility, the Jews collected the taxes that the non-Jewish residents owed to the Polish landlords. This had provided many Jews with financial security, but it now resulted in great suffering.
The Jewish community suffers tremendous damage. The leadership is wiped out, communities are laid low, Jews are murdered wholesale, and the Jewish community is dealt a blow from which it never will recover.
The survivors suffered exceptional trauma. Families struggled to earn a livelihood, and only a minority could afford their children a Torah education. Soon, a social rift emerged between the few scholars and the overwhelming majority of largely ignorant, impoverished Jews. This fissure only served to deepen the national trauma. Into this gloom, there stepped a man bearing tidings of salvation. It happened in 1665.
There appeared in the city of Smyrna in Turkey, in the Ottoman Empire at the time, a man named Shabtai Tzvi, a greatly charismatic, learned individual who declared himself to be the Messiah. He started a movement which spread like wildfire. There's a famous Jewish woman whose name was Glickel of Hameln, which is in Germany. She describes how her father packed his bags, sold his business, sat there waiting with his packed bags, waiting for the Messiah to reveal himself. The word came to Poland, and none other than Rabbi David Halevi, who was known in rabbinic circles as the author of one of the major commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, sent his son and someone else to go check out Shabtai Tzvi to see if it's possible that this is really the real thing. There were people who objected. There were people who warned, especially there was a rabbi in Amsterdam whose name was Rabbi Sasportas, who screamed and yelled that this guy's a fraud, but nobody wanted to listen to him.
Reasons for concern rapidly mounted as Shabtai grew increasingly erratic. His devotees attributed this to a superior state, but others recognized that he was mentally unstable. Modern scholars believe that he suffered from bipolar disorder. He introduced blatant violations of Torah law. Since the Messiah has arrived, he explained, matters previously forbidden are now permitted. One man who was particularly unimpressed with Shabtai was the Ottoman ruler Sultan Mehmed IV, who jailed the pseudo-Messiah as a revolutionary in February 1666. 7 months later, the Sultan gave him a choice of Islam or death. Shabtai chose Islam, and Jews worldwide reeled in disbelief.
The intensity of the anticipation that this was the Mashiach was so high that as high as the heights were of anticipation, so were the depths of disappointment among many, many Jews within the world. And the blow was just incalculable.
The Jews of Poland felt doubly abandoned. The new despair dashed their hopes for healing into the blood-soaked reality of post-massacre Poland, compounding hopelessness with suffering and social imbalance with spiritual crisis. A leadership vacuum ensued, and unworthy rabbis took advantage of the chaos and purchased or rented the title rabbi from the local nobles. These rabbis downplayed prayer and sincere spiritual growth. They focused on exhibiting their keen, analytic abilities, hoping to become widely known. Pay-to-play rabbis were not the role models and guides the struggling communities required at this fragile time. And by ripping the heart out of the daily prayers, these rabbis tore the soul out of a meaningful dialogue with God, just when the people needed it most. Despite a number of positive developments in Poland, even after 1648, Polish Jewry was in an overall material and spiritual decline. Many God-fearing Torah scholars struggled to survive. Unable and unwilling to bribe their way into rabbinical posts, they could also not rely on their impoverished brethren to hire them as teachers. Rather than fraternize with the unlearned masses, many such scholars embraced asceticism, studying, fasting, and praying in seclusion from their communities. Such individuals, who would normally have served as genuine role models, became unavailable to the community. Moreover, their overly ascetic lifestyles made them melancholic, deepening the national gloom. By the beginning of the 18th century, Jewry was spiritually lethargic, perhaps even comatose. This was the dismal scene into which Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov entered and began to spread his teachings.
Okay, so we're up to now the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement. And now we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about the contribution that he made to world Jewry and the difference that he made, and discuss the significance of that. So time is short. I'm going to try to see what I can Focus on what yeah. Yes. Yeah, he founded the Hasidic movement, exactly. That's what we're going to talk about. Let's take some time to talk about the Hasidic movement, what it is. You got the history on the video of what led to it. It was a very difficult time in Jewish history, time following Shabtai Tzvi, which that perhaps shows you why there was somewhat of an opposition to the Hasidic movement. And now let's take a few minutes to talk about what was the contribution of the Hasidic movement. Okay, so first of all, it started with love. Okay, if you look at the screen, you see here this text where the words that Baal Shem Tov said his father told him when he was a young child. Mein Kind, he said, my child, sollst nicht Meira haben vor keinem nicht. Do not fear anything or anyone except for God alone. And you should love your fellow Jew with the full flame of your heart, of your soul, no matter what it is or who it is. Okay, so here you have it. His birth was 18th of Elul today, 1698, which is the acronym of Nachas. He began disseminating his teachings on this date, 1734. Now, let us talk. That's his signature. You can see it on the screen. Let's look at this table here. We see the immigration of Jews from Central Europe more to Eastern Europe. We talked about the Khmelnytsky uprising, the pogroms, and the birth of the Baal Shem Tov and beginning of the Hasidic movement in 1734. So that's the history of the Hasidic movement. Now, here's the question I need to ask you. They say life is like an onion. Why is life like an onion? And what does that have to do with Hasidic teachings? Well, there's many layers to life, and likewise, like the onion. And in that sense, life is like an onion. Now, I'm sure that there's a lot of other similarities of the bitterness, of the layers, of the different things. But let's talk about the onions. Got many layers, and everything in life has multiple layers. Here's something we've previously looked at. You look at anything in life, you could see it as it is superficially, but then you could dig into the layers deeper beneath, and everything in life has those layers. So what does that have to do with the Hasidic movement? Well, the Hasidic movement was very much like that as well. What appears to the naked eye, say as the wooden table in front of you, you get to see that there's a lot more layers and depth to it if you pay attention. Hasidus does the same thing. What exists already, what's here, but when there's load shedding or when it's dark, you don't see it. Hasidus opens your eyes to a deeper level of understanding of the Jewish teachings. So while Kabbalah does the same, Kabbalah opens you up to those layers, but it's sort of only the esoteric side of Torah. And maybe halacha is only the outer layer of Torah. Hasidus meshes, it synthesizes, it brings the two together. That's the idea of Hasidus ultimately. The ability to give us a perspective, a paradigm. Hasidus shows us the inside story of a passage in Chumash, or of a Jewish law, or of a custom, but without sacrificing the simple meaning. That's the idea behind Hasidus. Instead, it brings the simple meaning to life, right? And this works not only in Torah scholarship, but in every aspect of life, how we live it. When things seem ugly or dull, Hasidus shows us the divine beauty inside of it. It helps us to redefine everything from its depth, to bring the depth out and show us the beauty of it. So it's not only seeing the depth, and it's not only seeing the externality, it's bringing the two together. That's what Hasidus does. And this is why Hasidus places a great emphasis not only on studying, right, not only on learning, but celebrating Jewish life, right, on avoda, digesting Judaism, making the teachings part of our life. And that's why Hasidus is a very celebratory kind of a movement, because by training ourselves to see the spiritual reality as the reality, this inside-out approach becomes intuitive. It becomes the way we like to see the world around us. Now you, I believe, Meyer, are you the descendant of some great Hasidic masters? Lenin. It's his birthday today. So you're a descendant of the Alter Rebbe. How do you like that? How do you like that? So now we understand that this idea, the synchronization of both the mystical as well as the nigla, the revealed part of Torah, all coming together. And now we can understand. Here's a very interesting sentence that the Rebbe Rashab said. He said the teachings of Kabbalah made man out of godliness, whereas the teachings of Chassidus made godliness out of man. Kabbalah and Chassidus both speak about the nature of God and spirituality. They both discuss this. But they work entirely differently. You see, Kabbalah decodes humanity in order to better understand God. That's the Kabbalistic way, right? Chassidus decodes God in order to better understand humanity and our role in this world. So it's a different angle. It's taking Kabbalah and making it practical, making it a way of life. Yeah, Maria. Yeah. Okay, in 5 seconds, that's a hard one. Chabad is an acronym of Chachma B'Dadas. It's actually more of an intellectual. So I wouldn't say it's uniquely Chabad that's celebratory, because probably other Hasidic movements are to some degree even more so. Chabad focused more on philosophy, even though Chabad today is very much a social and movement as well, and we do so much other. We're probably more known for our outreach. The other movements of Hasidus are mostly focused on Chagas, which is an acronym for Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, which is more the emotion of Judaism. So they probably put more emphasis on joy than Chabad did. But no doubt, if you can have the intellectual and emotion together, that is very joyous. And maybe that's a major part. Not to say that other Hasidic movements disregard the intellectual side, but the emphasis in Chabad was on the cognitive, intellectual understanding of God and learning from God about how to live in the best way possible. The other Hasidic movements put more of an emphasis on the spiritual and the emotional side. That's in a nutshell. Okay, so now let's try to see how these ideas tell us a little bit about what Hasidus is, what the Baal Shem Tov tried to achieve, and we don't have time for too much, so let's just take one teaching in particular of the Baal Shem Tov. Okay, he says here, divine providence extends to this world as much as it does to the supernal realms. Events ranging from the journey of a detached leaf fluttering in the wind, to a worm slithering in the desert or in a city, to a conversation between fish in the sea, to the minute movements of the smallest creature found in the ocean, all take place by divine providence. He's focusing on the idea of divine providence. And in fact, when we don this lens of seeing things from this perspective, we see the world around us, not just the big things, but everything in it. So, for example, yesterday I took my kids to Kosher World. The other way, they offered it to us. If any of you wants to go to Kosher World and play a round of golf, putt-putt, you could do the same. So they offered it to us, but I just don't see us having the time to go as a group. So I saw, if you take a little golf ball and you put it to your eye, what happens? All you can see is, right. But once you start moving the ball away, not only do you see the ball, you can see everything else around. And I think many people in this world, Jew and non-Jew alike, believe in God, believe in the greatness of God as the omnipotent creator and power. But many believe that because God is so great, he's too great to concern himself with all the pettiness of this world and the very finite creatures that inhabit this world, all those things, right? How could such a great infinite power possibly care about or have the time and headspace to worry about this world, let alone myself in this world, right? So what happens, that's a perspective. That the idea that what leaves so many people walking around Earth feeling that their entire life is just random. I'm here, just happen to be here. And people think that they don't make a difference. And this is what the Baal Shem Tov wanted to teach, that everyone makes a difference. Even a leaf falling off the tree, you'll realize is covering that little worm that needed some shade. You know the butterfly effect? Everyone familiar with the butterfly effect? The famous teaching, I don't remember where the source is, but I think it was a Jewish scientist. Maybe Miriam can help us out with it. But a butterfly that flutters its wings somewhere in one place can cause a hurricane somewhere else on the other side of the world. That's basically the idea of the butterfly effect. And the point is, nothing is random. Every single thing has a purpose and a reason. And just like the balabasta in the house knows exactly where she put each thing because there's a purpose for it. There's a reason why it's there, right? And the same thing is that we have to understand God has a master plan, and every single thing that happens in this world is part of that master plan. You guys all know the story about the couple dating. I heard the story many years ago. And while they're dating, she says to him, you know, when we get married, I let you make all the big decisions. Just leave the small decisions for me. So he thinks, okay, that sounds like a very good idea. I get to make all the big decisions, right? Wonderful. Now they get married, and what happens? Hasn't yet made a single decision. She makes all the decisions. So he doesn't understand what's going on. He says to her, I thought you said I get to make all the big decisions. Why are you making every decision? She says, I don't think you understood me right. The big decisions of humanity, like whether, South Africa should allow BRICS into the other countries into BRICS, or what the US policy with Iran should be, or what Israel should decide. Those big decisions you can make. The small decisions of life, what we do in our house, where to hang the pictures, which school our kids go to, where we're going to live, what we do, that's my decisions. Okay. God is present in all decisions, the small decisions, the big decisions. God's part of it all. Divine providence doesn't just apply to the watershed moments in our lives, but also to the nitty-gritty details of the daily grind. And it applies not only to human beings, but also to animals and to plants and even the inanimate objects. God is involved in everything. God not only determines who and what we do, and if we'll succeed or fail. God is involved in every single detail. We are indispensable to God's plan. Okay, and that's something we have to remember. To find God, you don't have to gaze at the brilliant stars that are shining so far away. God is there just as much as God is in a handful of beach sand. Each and every grain exists by divine supervision. Every single one of us is important. There's not a blade of grass that's the same as another, not a grain of sand that's the same as another. And each one of us has our own unique fingerprint and what do they call it? Face ID. We all have to realize every single one of us is dear and precious to Hashem. And when we see things from that perspective, we're able to appreciate the depth of our connection to God. That was a major, major teaching of Baal Shem Tov. Many people believe that a connection with God is dependent on our behavior, right? According to that theory, a person born with no inherent connection, but if you study Torah, if you do mitzvahs, if you do what Hashem wants, now the connection, you understand, is the connection's always there. You always have a connection to Hashem. There's no such thing as somebody has more of a connection. Every single one of us has a connection to God. The person who does the Torah mitzvahs is fulfilling the will of Hashem. And the Baal Shem Tov taught that we have to understand it's, we're all deeply connected to God because of who we are, regardless of what we do. True, the more Torah we learn and the more mitzvahs we do, the more we reveal that connection. But regardless of what we do, that connection exists all the same. Every single one of us has to know that we are equally precious to God. That was a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. I hope that answers your question about what it means to what the Hasidic movement introduced. So there's a lot more to talk about, but I think we'll conclude here. The question now is about tomorrow. So Miriam, are you gonna, I don't mind going a little late, so we could split it 50-50, or if you prepared already, it could be completely your class, and you'll see me all just on Wednesday.